The way that I began to look at this topic is obviously as part of my reminiscing and thinking about Islamism. Again, this is a topic that comes directly out of working with Islamism for a long time, or thinking about Islamism for a long time. Talking to people, and as Islamism took different shape, through radicalization, through Al-Qaeda, ISIS globally, and also local development as such, you always raise questions about what is its nature. Is there a way of thinking about? At least that's what I was thinking about. Can one use can one think about this phenomenon very differently? So I call it the phenomenology because this is a term that is used in the study of religions, where the students of religion from the 19th century, and I think there's one book that I would really advise you to read, and which we read in our reading group. It's a book by Capps, and it's called The Discipline for this, at least making religious studies, the making of a discipline. The religious studies, the making of a discipline. Maybe some of you can just write a note, and then we'll put a lot of things in that shared folder as well. In this book, you have a very, very good long-term history of how scholars of religion have developed the subject and how they have thought about it. It is a book that is published in 1995. It's an invaluable historical overview, and it's got some really interesting insights. And in fact, a lot of something that I say now, sometimes they come from that kind of a framing as well. When I said I have read Recur, but for example, Walter Capps has got a very interesting section on how to think about Recur as a hermeneutical scholar. So somehow it provides this kind of map for you to think about how, certainly in a modern scholar, in the Western scholars of scholarship of religion, and that is often the discipline that I'm working from, but I'm also debating with. So this one question about the phenomenology of religion, at least the phenomenology of Tajdid, comes from this question that was posed in the 19th century, that let us look at the phenomena, and we are able to then see what it means. What is the meaning of that phenomena? In a nutshell, that is what phenomenology is all about. You can forget that for a moment, but I want you to start with this hadith, which is maybe familiar to you. I think most of you will be very familiar with it, or all of you will be. That Allah will raise for this community, at the head of every 100 years, one who will renovate its religion for it. إِنَّ اللَّهَ يَبْعَثُ لِهَذِهِ الْأُمَّةِ عَلَى رَأْسِ كُلِّ مِئَةٍ سَنَةٍ مَنْ يُجَدِّدُ لَهَا دِينَهَا. Okay. So this text as such is, is a kind of a definition of what has been called Tajdid, or what is the Mujaddid, and it has been, it has been circulated, it has been spoken about by Muslim scholars, that every 100 years there is a need actually to revive and to go back to the tradition. I also know from this tradition that in the course of the modern period, in the 19th century, there were a lot of people who were coming up, were emerging as mujaddids. Not only one person, but many of the wars against colonialism took the form of a mujaddid, of the idea of a Mahdi sometimes, and the idea of a mujaddid. These are all terms that are used sometimes interchangeably, or at least they come together with each other. In the 20th century, there were also some groups like that who made themselves as such. But generally, in the modern period, we've had a bit of a, on the one hand, we have had this occasionally, but it has not been, Mujaddid has never been accepted by all the Muslims. So it's a bit of a problem to think of whether this has actually taken place, or can we think about this in a sort of in a general sense. So these are the questions that I posed for myself in this paper. The question that I told you that you should have: what is the return to the origin? So obviously, the hadith means that you must go back to the past. Somebody will help us to get us to the past. What is its meaning? What is the cause and what is the effect? What causes the rise of this tajdid? Why do you have this at the head of every 100 years? Or when you do have people who are saying they are the mujaddid, or somebody says now we have a mujaddid, how does it come about? Why does it come about at this time and not any other time? How does this Tajdid, and that's the first kind of question. The first set of questions is what is happening in the Muslim societies. The second question is, how does Tajdid compare with a similar attention to origins in the study of religions? So in the study of religions, from the 19th century onwards, when people wanted to study religions in general, what they said is that let us go back to the founding moment of religion. So if we want to study all religions, this is a theory in the study of religion, I don't know how familiar with it, but I'll try and explain it briefly. They said that if you go back to the very, what they call at that time, primitive religions, the original religions, so that's why they looked at African religions, they looked at Aborigines in Australia, they thought these were people who lived like they used to live 5,000 years ago, obviously which was false, but they thought that they were primitive, but they also were fascinated by the fact that their religion can perhaps tell us the basic ingredients of what religions are in principle. So when you look at Islam and Christianity, which they would consider to be late religions, more developed religions, they contain the kernel, they contain the deeper insights of what makes a religion. You understand that concept? So they also said, let's go back to the origins. And Muslims themselves are saying we must go back to the first period of Islam so that we can revive it. I'm asking the question of the same. I'm recognizing. I recognize that, and I struggled quite a long time. Now I'm saying it nicely to you. That that's why I'm saying you start with this. You realize normally in a study of religion is, well, we want to study origins, but you never look at Islam because Islam is a very young religion compared to Aborigines and African religions. So you don't study in order for you to study the origins, you look for old religions, very old religions that you have very little recollection, you don't have really records of, you have old stories, you have narratives, that tell us about the origins of, the world, like the mythologies of the Aborigines, for example, that people looked at in the 19th century. But I was aware at the same time that Muslims also speak about this going to the past. So that's why I put the two questions together. Is that sort of helping you to... So on the one hand, my brain is telling me this is what I learned from the study of religion. My Islamic studies is telling me there is something there as well, and I'm putting them together. And I'm just posing the questions. I'm not yet coming to an answer, but I'm putting the questions forward because I'm using the study of Islam and the study of religions to bring questions together, to put them close to each other. Okay, so that's the questions. Easy, right? Okay. No. You understand the question. I mean, you see where but it comes from my experience, right? I'm writing this paper. I presented this paper in 2012. So it's been, it's a lot. So I'm saying that whatever questions you have, the question comes from yourself, but don't be afraid of taking the questions from the disciplines. If you study hadith, you take the question from there. I find it is useful to take the questions from the study of religions or the study of culture, because then you begin to, because this is where we are. We are living in a multi-religious society, we're living in a university, we are at a university, so we are benefiting from these kind of disciplines. Or for that matter, maybe I should say, we can't help it. Okay, now to come back to my model, well, who has written about this? What is this thing about the origins? What is the origins in the study of religion? What have scholars in the study of religion said about the study of the origins? So, in the first person I'm using, his name is Mircea Eliade, very prominent scholar in the study of religion in the 20th century. He suggested that every religion has got the search for the essence, search for the origin. He said, whatever religion you look at, he didn't say it in Islam, he said it about Islam, Christianity, and he says, according to him, his interpretation of this is, when you search for the origins, you search for the essence of humanity. What you find in the origins is the essence of your humanity. You find the essence of the religion, which is also the essence of humanity. So he would argue that this idea of going back to the Quran or taking the journey, if you look at the journey of the Sufis who go back, who find their way back to God, for example, they are making a journey to the essence. You see what he's saying? And he says that is true of all religions. He wrote, he said it was not just simply, it was not by accident that all religions have this, what he called the myth of eternal return. That's the word that he used. The myth of the eternal return is something that you find across the religions, and it shows that human beings are going back to their essence. So he was he was criticized a lot by religious studies scholars because they said he was a bit too spiritual, he was too religious. Religious studies must be a little bit more, strict, and it must be critical. So this is his idea of what was going on in the study of religion. At the study, when you find this, then you're actually seeing the true essence of humanity. Another group of this other person, Turner, who was influenced by Max Weber. Now I hope that you can see that how I'm repeating these people, right? You come across Max Weber. These are the people that would come again. So according to him, he did a paper on Islam and Christianity. Both in Islam and Christianity you have a return to origin. So he hasn't done as extensive a paper as Eliade. But when I searched when you search your JSTOR or you search all your references, you're looking for any article that is in a title, search for origins or going back to the beginnings. Eventually you'll come across them, but it does take a bit of time looking for them. You don't always find them immediately. What Turner argued in his paper, in his article, was to say that this idea of turning back to the origin is a way of keeping new developments in check. So it maintains the identity of the tradition. So the reason, and you know this very well when you think about Islam, the reason why Islam stays more or less the same, or at least doesn't stay the same, but that you can recognize Islam over the last 1500 years, is because of the fact that if you were never going back to the past, you would not maintain the continuity of the tradition. So the idea of the scholars coming back and saying, we have to go back to the past, maintains the tradition. But it doesn't completely avoid change. What it does is that it allows for some amount of change and some amount of continuity. So he saw this as a kind of a conservative movement. In sociology we have conservative, that means things don't change too much or things stay the same. So he saw the origins as a way of keeping the change. So even though you have very interesting new developments brought about by people like Imam Shafi'i, and then ideas from Greece came in, they were adopted by rational thinking, and then you have modernity, but they still, the idea that you go into a Muslim society, this is a Muslim society because of this going back to the origin, because of the fact you always trace back to what happened in the past. So Turner is not looking at Eliade. You can say Turner is not such of spiritual inclined. That's why they criticize Eliade. He thinks that this idea of the origin it actually serves a social function. It serves the function of holding the tradition, not to change too much. Okay. Masuzawa, who is a post-colonial scholar, Japanese scholar, post-colonial scholar, he says the search for origins. Now she's not interested in what happens in religions, but she says you have to look at the people who are studying the search for origins. Take this. This is a slight switch, because post-colonial scholars, postmodern scholars are not always. They don't tell you so much about the religions. They often tell you about the people who are studying religions. Okay, you see that move, right? It's actually, you study me, you don't study what I'm studying. Right? You study people like myself, or people who are scholars, who have been writing about this. She says that, why in the 19th century, why were you suddenly interested in origins? So the obvious thing that the scholars said, well, we were studying origins because we wanted to know the true nature of religion. He said, no, you're not really doing that. See, can you see the influence of Nietzsche? You're doing something else. Masuzawa said that this origins, the search for origins that so inspired, that was so preoccupying the scholars of religion, is she was saying that they were living in a world of that was made by the camera. I think I have to find a nicer, more elegant way of saying that. She said the origins were lost in the world of the camera. In the world of the camera, which we all are aware of, the camera reproduces the origins. Can you know? You have an original. You know, when you think about a painting, when you think about an artistic work, that is the original, right? That is what you appreciate. But now when you have a camera, you just take a photograph of it, you can take the Mona Lisa and you get millions of copies. So she says that in the 19th century, the scholars were aware that the origins were lost. There was no such a thing as original copies anymore. And so therefore, the study of religion was helping them to capture something of the origins. So it was their own psychological fear of losing the origins in an age of reproductive, in an age of photographic reproduction. That's the title of the book. So you can see these are three, sort of dominant theoretical, reflections in the study of religion that was telling you that what was the meaning of this turn to origins. So you have Eliade, Essence of Humanity, Turner, Conservative Tradition, Masuzawa, post-colonial. Post-colonial and postmodern is a critique of the modernists. So she's saying, this is the problem with you. This has nothing to do with the religions. But I'm coming, it has something to do with religion. Muslims are still doing that. So I was not happy enough with the post-colonial, this kind of postmodernist reading. I think it's fine for her to tell us why the European scholars were doing that, but it doesn't help us what the Muslim scholars are doing with this. Why is it that Muslim scholars or Muslims are engaging with this exercise? Okay, then I sort of then I looked at, obviously my next step is actually to say, what do the scholars say about Tajdid? So this is a part where I'm saying, I'm interested in Tajdid, but I'm also aware that I'm not the first one who is. I found these two very strong traditions or two scholarly studies of what is the Tajdid, what is the meaning of Tajdid. The first one was by a scholar by the name of Landau, and who is a Schachtian scholar. So I don't know, because you are studying with, in UJ, perhaps you know Joseph Schacht, right? He's the scholar who has been studying Hadith, and he's been studying about the authenticity of Hadith. But what Joseph Schacht introduced was a method of how to study Hadith. And what he's arguing was that the Hadith were, he's put forward the claim that Hadith is a way in which the first person, to put it in a nice way, the Hadith are sort of invented, or at least they are fabricated in order to support a position. Okay, that is his more or less argument. But he also says that it is a Hadith that develops backward, not necessarily forward. So it's not something that comes from the beginning, but it comes from the back. We're not going to discuss the validity of it, but this person who studied this Hadith of the Tajdid showed in her writing, and I can give you the reference if you want to read it, she's basically showing that this Hadith was particularly circulated or was shared by Shafi'i scholars. Only by Shafi'i scholars. And so therefore she argues that this Hadith was used in order to support the legitimacy of the Shafi'i school. Okay? So the Hadith provided a function to say that Shafi'i was the Mujaddid, but it was produced, it was invented, not by Shafi'i himself, but his students, by his followers, in order to support the Shafi'i school. Okay, I know that this will be a bit unproblematic in traditional thought, but don't shoot the messenger. It was used to, and if you, as I said, I've given you somewhat of a detail about what this is, maybe not enough. If you want, she's written this fairly extensive, scholar. But so her argument is that this hadith was what performed a certain function, and it performed the function particularly. But she couldn't explain what happened later. How did it happen later? Because she was only focused on this particular period of time. lo and behold, as I read further, I came across Ibrahim Musa's text. Ibrahim Musa has written about this in an encyclopedia, in a fairly encyclopedia of political thought. And his argument with him and one of his students, they produced this also a longer history of Tajdid, and they are actually showing that Tajdid is the political theology of Islam. So what they're saying is that every time there is a new Mujaddid, there's a new set of questions that are posed about Tajdid. So he says that it is not only among the legal scholars, like the Shafi scholars, that are using this, but it is also used by, say, Ghazali. He's mentioned a few examples, others have built up a narrative. And he calls it political theology. I should have put it in inverted commas. It's a political theology of Islam. And he says Tajdid is an opportunity to raise new questions, a way to raise questions again about the tradition. So he says if you don't see it openly, but you see it as a way of introducing some ideas. So you can see how he's taking the opposite of Turner's position. The Turner says it's conservative. For Ibrahim Musa, it's not conservative, it's actually changing. The thing is actually changing tradition. Okay, so this is just again an illustration of how we use scholarship to see the debate going on. Sometimes you might even get another scholar coming up and saying that, oh, he doesn't agree with any of these two, and maybe there's a third option. But I hope that this is, in fact, somebody else who writes about Tajdid, hopefully they will put my article there and say, you know, there's something else now, we have to do that, and maybe we can, that's how knowledge develops when we speak about, development approach. So what approach did I take in this? I decided to take an intertextual approach to the hadith. Intertextual means that where is the hadith located in the collection? Where is the hadith coming from? What does it look like in Abu Dawood, for example? And I must say that before I started doing that, I didn't realize where it was. It was in Kitab al-Malahim. So in Kitab al-Malahim is the end of times. I found so many different hadith about, what will happen after the death of the Prophet. There will be 12 Quraysh leaders. This is all from Abu Dawood. I've given you the reference. You can find it in the text. There will be, that there will be all this crisis will happen, and within all of this crisis, all of these problems that you will get, there will be the hadith comes up with Sunan Abu. And for me, my interpretation of this, my understanding of this is that you have to see where is it located first of all. And I thought that among all the people who had studied it, none of them said it's in Kitab al-Malahim. So that is my little contribution. They don't say it is there, and for me, I think that's quite significant. That you are speaking about somebody who is going to revive a tradition, you're going to revive Islam in the context of crisis. So I think that that's something that I'm adding to in my analysis. And then I was also interested in how is the hadith interpreted by people. So I tried as much as possible not only to look at the hadith, but what do Muslim scholars say about the hadith? So I looked at Sunan Abu Dawood, but also looked at the sharh of Awn al-Ma'bud of Sunan Abu Dawood as well. So I tried to understand what Azim, what is his name? Azim Abadi, who writes, who's the author of that. So how does he interpret this text? And you can see what I found from there. For example, he said that he writes at the end of the 19th century, so how he is talking about so many different mujaddid. It's almost like he realizes there are so many taking place. He doesn't give the citation, but it was interesting in that way as well. And taking all of this the intertextual as well as the commentary of the Muslim scholars, I'm saying that Tajdid speaks about an idea of an original crisis. The original crisis is the death of the Prophet ﷺ, because once you don't have a prophet, you have to have something else in his place. But you cannot have another prophet, so the crisis is cyclical, or it is betrayed as such, or the solution is betrayed. So that is where my analysis comes close to. So I'm coming back to it, that I'm suggesting that this is a kind of a phenomenology of the Tajdid. Normally I don't like the word phenomenology, but the idea is that can we say that this is the meaning of Tajdid? The Tajdid refers to the fact that Muslims over the years, over 1400 years, have experienced various forms of crises. Just like you have crisis now, and always, and that crisis has often been marked by the fact that there is a mujaddid. But that mujaddid cannot necessarily replace or cannot completely solve the crisis because we don't have a prophet. So the study of religion, in the study of religion, we saw from Iliade to a kind of a post-structuralist, or I call it now post-structuralist, but it's the same terms. They are very similar term, postmodernism, which turns attention to the scholars who engage in this framing. So when I'm looking at the Tajdid in Islamic discourse, is a response to crisis and change, but the Prophet ﷺ cannot be replaced, so Tajdid cannot necessarily succeed. So there's a kind of a endemic problematic in the idea of Tajdid in the way it is understood. And so that is part of my way of understanding, of trying to not to understand, but to make sense of the kind of crisis that Muslims sometimes find themselves in. Okay, so thank you very much.